I hope you all are doing fine in this COVID era, and God knows when this pandemic gonna end. And stay safe, stay home, and uh, be prepared for your internal assessment, which might take place in October. And we will have endocrinology and hematology topic upfront, as well as the certain infectious diseases which Swarna madam is taking for you all. And so we were talking about acute leukemias, the topic of acute and chronic leukemia, and today our topic is acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Basically, this is a disease of a childhood disease. Prevalence is more common in children 1 to 10 years of age. But since this is a part of our hematology, we have to cover it up. And I wanted to simplify it and make it as simple as possible, because I don't think you will get many questions from this topic. But it's a topic where you should be familiar with. So keep yourself safe and your family safe. Now we'll quickly move on to the slides. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, as it sounds, it's you can make out it's acute myeloproliferative disease of the blood cells, especially the lymphoblastic lineage. So it's a neoplastic proliferation of hematopoietic cells, and it's been basically, we're talking about the acute leukemias. They have been categorized into acute myeloid, which we talked about, and acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And now talking about the hematopoietic cells, these are the precursor cells, as you know. The one is the lymphoid progenitor, the other one is the myeloid progenitor, and as these cells matures and mature into the penultimate and ultimate cells, the one forms the myeloid series, the other forms the lymphoid series. So the problem with the early progenitor cells, especially the lymphoid lineage, and that classify as acute lymphoblastic leukemia. A difference in the lymphoblast and myeloblast will just reflect on that. So you have a very coarse nuclear chromatin in cases of lymphoblasts. Fine in myeloblasts, nuclei will be more prominent in myeloblasts. The nucleus and cytoplasm ratio is high in lymphoblasts, because lymphoblasts have scanty cytoplasm. You should remember this, remember from your pathology days. But myeloblasts have they again, I think they may be high or normal, because they have a very they are highly the cytoplasm is more prominent in cases of myeloblast. Oil rods are present in myeloblast. Well, then you have lymphocyte precursors and myeloid precursors in myeloblasts. Myeloperoxidase enzyme positive in myeloblast precursor cells. It's invariably negative in lymphoblast. In certain biphenotypic lymphoblasts, you might, just 1 to 2% of these cells, you might have MPO positive, but usually it's negative in lymphoblast. Then you have PAS stain, which is a periodic acid skiff stain, which is block positivity in lymphoblasts, so it's negative in blasts. So you can see these AML, you have myeloblast, which is a large blast with a moderate amount of granular cytoplasm, and prominent nucleoli and oil rods may be seen. And in cases of ALL, you have smaller blasts with scant cytoplasm, very scanty cytoplasm, and dense chromatin and indistinct nuclei and no oil rods. So definition wise, again, it's a malignant disease of the marrow in which the early lymphoid precursors proliferate and replace the normal hematopoietic cells. So this is basically a neoplasm which composed of immature pre-T cells, and lesser you can have a mature P and T cells. also, and it's primarily a disease of a childhood, and cases 75% under 6 years, mostly B cell predominant up to 75 to 80%, and rest 15 to 20% T cells, and there is a minor amount of 1 to 2% with a biphenotypic characteristics. Then it peak at 3 years, while TLL may peak at adolescence, and there is a slight male predominance. Now, epidemiology wise, this is a commonest form of malignancy in childhood. Majority of the children are of 2 to 10 years. Peak incidence at 4 to 5 years, and very importantly, it has a very acute onset and a very short history, and it's more frequent in childhood than AML. Factors predisposing or causes. So mostly there have to be 2 causes, as we saw in all the other leukemias. Invariably it has to be genetic. It can be a genetic syndrome, or it can be a mutation, or where you can have abnormality in the gene location, maybe a translocation, or maybe a deletion, or a total complete sets of genes missing out, or there can be hyperploidy, there can be diploidy. So this is you have then ionizing radiation induced mutations, and the mutation can be due to even drug induced mutation can be there. So genetic causes, very commonly you have Down syndrome, Turner syndrome, then there's something called Fanconi syndrome, which is different from the then you have a Diamond-Blackfan syndrome, then you have neurofibromatosis type 1, and then you have ataxia telangiectasia syndrome, then you can have SCID, which is subacute combined immunodeficiency syndrome, then PNH, which we talked about, then you have Lee-Fraumeni syndrome, and very importantly Bloom syndrome. Environmental factors can be ionizing radiation, drugs, alkylating those chemotherapic agents, nitrosourea, podophylotoxins, then benzene exposure, and advanced maternal age has been have been incidentally found with this as one of the minor predisposing factor, and definitely paternal smoking. Pathophysiology, I said there will be a maturational arrest, especially in the early stage of development. There will be abnormal expression of genes, and that will result of chromosomal translocations, can be a balanced or imbalanced translocation, and as the lymphoblast will replace the normal marrow elements, so that will decrease the normal productions of blood cells. And secondly, there will be, because of the dysregulated lymphoblastic activity, there will be bone marrow hyperplasia and pain because of the space occupying lesions because of this myeloproliferative cells. Then you can have anemia, thrombocytopenia, neutropenia to a varying degrees, and as the lymphoblasts proliferate in the other organs other than bone marrow, like in liver, spleen, lymph, and you will invariably have hepatomegaly, splenomegaly, and enlarged lymph nodes, which will usually be generalized. Classification wise, we have a traditional French American British classification, which is the mnemonics is 5 for this, which is based on a morphology and cytochemistry, but it has largely been replaced by WHO classification because this classification is based on a more wider spectrum of parameters like molecular, immunophenotypic, morphological, as well as clinical features. So it encompasses all these attributes. So the WHO classification has superseded this FAB classification which we used to study nowadays. FAB classification was pretty simple. You have L1 type, L2 type, L3 type, where you will have small round blasts, scant cytoplasm, and indistinct nucleus, and 75% of the cells were in L1 phase. Then as the cell progresses to L2, there will be moderate amount of cytoplasm and a larger blast and fine chromatin, or one or more of a large distinct nucleoli, as you can see, and the prevalence is up to 20%. In the L3 is a larger blast with a moderate amount of basophilic vacuolated cytoplasm. You can see these are vacuolated cytoplasm. Or this one, this is nucleolus. This is the vacuolated site. This the cytoplasm. You can see the vacuolations. These are the vacuolations. So round to oval nucleus, then stippled chromatin, one or more distinctive nucleoli. Incidence is 5%. So why FAB classification has been done away with? Because it does not include the immunophenotypic cytogenetics, then molecular characteristics, immunological. There were certain immunological subtypes which has not been addressed in FAB classification. There is something called, I talked about it, is a biphenotypic leukemia, which have certain feature about B cells and T cells, as well as AML kind of cells. So, and then there's a limited relevance to the therapeutic or prognostic implication as far as the FAB classification was concerned. So there is something more like immunological classification, which is an immunological base, which to simplify the leukemias into PLL leukemia, TLL, then this mixed lineage acute leukemia, or the other name is biphenotypic leukemia or undifferentiated acute leukemia. So there are certain markers where under the immunological classification, you don't have to remember this classification. I'll just show you the markers which are very important with the P lineage, especially TDT positive in both in B cells and T cells, but CD10 positive is more common in B lineage, which is more common in mature B cells, and then you have TDT positive. These two are the important markers which I want to reflect. Well, I go on to the next slides, where you have TLL, where you will be mostly CD1, CD2, CD3, CD4, CD5, and 7, 8 TDT positive cells. So these are, I'm talking about the a footnote on biphenotypic leukemia. It is comprises of 1 to 2% of the acute leukemia. You have two population cells, large cells which have differentiation as a myeloblast, because some of them are myeloperoxidase positive and SBB positive, and usually with OR rods, or smaller blasts with L1 morphology can be there. So WHO classification, in WHO classification you have B lymphoblastic leukemia, not very specified ones, and B lymphoblastic leukemia with recurrent genetic abnormality, and T lymphoblastic leukemias. And this is how the WHO classification looks like. B lymphoblastic, no one specific ones. Then B lymphoblastic leukemia with the recurrent genetic abnormalities. The abnormalities will be translocation 9 to 22, or you can have rearrangements. You can have a translocation 12 to 21. Then you can have leukemia with hyperdiploidy, which is extra set of genes, and you can have leukemia with hypodiploidy with lesser sets of genes. Then you can have 5 to 4 translocation, and you can have which. So these all are the leukemia associated with B cell lymphoblastic leukemia, and then you can have T cell lymphoblastic leukemias. So that was all about the presentation of the classification. The presentation is just very important. It's an abrupt onset. The incident can be or the manifestation can be as less than as 1 week. A child might be completely normal, and you will be highly active and participating in sports activity, and over a period of time, maybe in 1 week or 10 days, he start feeling very fatigability, pallor, and there might be easy bruising or petechiae or purpura, and by the end of a month he would be severely pallor and fatigue, and there will be hepatomegaly or generalized lymphadenopathy. So it's a very stormy and abrupt onset, and if it's not been diagnosed, or the chemotherapy not addressed as soon as possible, it can be very fatal. So these are the basic symptoms. You can have fatigue, pallor, easy bruising, bleeding, fever, dyspnea, dizziness, weight loss, and joint extremity pains, even sternal tenderness or joint pain, because of the lymphoproliferative cells inside the bone marrow. Then you can have CNS involvement also. It's a very important feature of this. It has a high predisposition to CNS involvement, where it can be a meningeal irritation or meningeal deposition, and they can have increased intracranial tension, and that leads to vomiting and visual difficulty or headache. And then you can have a generalized lymphadenopathy. Lymphadenopathy is usually described as lymph nodes more than 5 so that could be just a minute, I think. So we're talking about the lymphadenopathy. You can have a lymph node which will be a continuous lymph node, matted, or it won't be matted, but it will be rubbery in consistency, and contiguous lymph node, more than one sets of lymph node will be enlarged, and that size will be more than 5 millimeter, and you can have a rubbery consistency. It will be mostly be non-tender, and any lymph nodes, especially cervical, tracheal, inguinal, sets of lymph nodes will be involved, paratracheal and abdominal, and something left supraclavicular lymph node, which is also known by the name of Sister Joseph's lymph nodes. Then you can have splenomegaly, progressive splenomegaly. It might not be very large, but it will be moderate splenomegaly. Hepatomegaly will be more substantial than splenomegaly, which is quite the contrary. What happens in the in those the thalassemias and those extravascular hematopoiesis or extravascular hemolysis, where you have highly proliferative splenomegaly, or massively enlarged splenomegaly. But out here you can have a moderate splenomegaly. Then gonads, the testicular involvement is again very common in this case. You can have a unilateral tender testicular mass, and then mediastinal mass, which is more common with T-cell leukemias. Investigations, you'll get a peripheral blood smear, bone marrow examination, cytochemistry, immunohistochemistry, and if there's a testicular involvement, you can have a testicular biopsy, or you can have a CSF examination and chest X-ray. So normocytic, normochromic anemia, usually the TLC, you might have a decrease, or you can have a normal, or maybe increase, or maybe there is a something analogous to the blast crisis or leukocytoclastic response, where increase in WBC and leading to several manifestation of hyperviscosity syndrome, like CNS manifestation of stroke or hypoxia due to decreased oxygenation in the lungs. So it can be a normal TLC on blood smear examination, and lymphoblasts can be seen, not very standardized that you will be seeing lymphoblasts in the peripheral smear. But what really brings or rather adds to the query, or that which actually attracts our attention, is the thrombocytopenia. Any thrombocytopenia with petechiae or purpura, and with a normal TLC, that can be very indicative of in showing ALL in the individuals. So you have to be very particular about the thrombocytopenia along with the morphology of the other cells on the peripheral smears. The bone marrow, either it definitely will be hypercellular proliferations of leukemic blast, and can be BLL lineage or a TLL lineage. And BLL, as I said, the population of a small homogeneous population of these cells with a round and irregular nucleus with more variable cytoplasms and distinct nuclei, and it can be scant to moderate, and there might be a slightly basophilic or deeply basophilic. Then TLL, we will have a larger nuclear convolutions and significant nuclear hyperchromasia. So the criteria for diagnosis, as the WHO puts it, traditionally it was 30% of the blast cells, but now the bone marrow diagnosis, WHO puts it around more than 20% blasts, which is mostly MPO negative. The terminal deoxyribonucleotide transferase positive, which is very significant of lymphoblasts, and a certain L3 TDT can be L3 phase can be TDT negative. Cytochemistry in AML, which is mostly the MPO positive, very typicality of AML is myeloperoxidase positive, but it will be negative in ALL, and usually the non-specific enolase or SPB might be positive in AML and negative in ALL, but PAS will be more positive in cases of ALL, and acid phosphatase is more signifies or it shows TLL lineage. The markers for these surface markers, which are the antigens present on the B cells and T cells, or other the surface antigens, and very typical of B's, especially the mature B cells, are CD22 and CD79, and precursors are C19, C10, and TDT and HLA-DR, and especially CD10 have usually signifies a poor prognosis, as we'll see in the next few slides. The precursor T cells, again, it is the surface markers D1, D2, D3, D4, D5, D7, TDT positive and CD8 positive. Then usually when you have classify B cell ALL differentiated from the T cells, and early pro B cells will be more positive for TDT and negative for CALA, negative for surface IG, and then the pre-cell ALL will be positive for CALA and TDT and negative for surface IgG, while mature B cell might be negative for TDT. As I said, this is more present in the precursor B cells and T cells, and CALA will be positive. CALA is basically a common leukocyte leukemic antigens, which will be present in mature B cells or T cells, and surface immunoglobulin will be present on. This shows the mature B cells. And T cells, the surface type will be CD3, CD4, CD8. These are more significant for the early subtypes, and the later subtypes you will have CD4 and CD8 or CD3 plus. In other investigation can be examination of CSF when there is an involvement of CNS, or testicular biopsy to rule out residual disease, and chest X-ray for any mediastinal involvement. So prognostic factors, very importantly, should know WBC count less than 10,000 is a favorable outcome, more than 2 lakhs is unfavorable, age presentation 2 to 10 is more favorable as compared to more than 10 or less than 1 year. Female have a favorable outcomes, and any absence of CNS, testicular or nodal or liver splenomegaly will definitely have a good prognosis. L1 Fab type will have a good prognosis. Cytogenetically, you will have 12, 21 or 4, 10, 17 trisomy, or in hyperdiploidy have a good prognosis. Hyperdiploidy has a bad prognosis. Then 9 to 22 Philadelphia chromosome or L2 variety, they all have a bad prognosis. And if the time to remission on the initiation of chemotherapy is less than 14 days, that again signifies a good favorable prognosis, while if the time of remission it takes more than 28 days, it's indicative of a unfavorable prognosis. Treatment wise, all you should know, there is a pre-chemotherapy supportive care, then chemotherapy, there is induction phase, remission induction phase or reinduction phase, and CNS preventive therapy, then consolidation and maintenance therapy. And the other choice is allogenic stem cell transplantation. Newer drugs have been proposed and been used. And then supportive care is, or the palliative care is again one of the very core part of the treatment, and treatment of relapses and the side effects of treatment. This all has to be addressed as far as the treatment in totality is concerned. And usually initially before the treatment, ALL used to have a very bad prognosis, but the 10-year survival rate have definitely increased after the induction, after the initiation, but as far as advancement in the diagnostic modality and the treatment modality is concerned. So usually the induction therapy is through this pre-induction glucocorticoid, then vincristine, asparaginase, methotrexate plus minus anthracycline, or for a standard risk patient. For a high risk and a very high risk, you can try all this medical these chemotherapies. And for CNS preventive therapy, you can even use intrathecal chemotherapy, or if it's a high risk, you can also top up the intrathecal chemotherapy with cranial irradiation. And if there is a need for any consolidation, or there is a residual not complete remission, or there is a residual cells, you can reinduce with chemotherapy and or in cases of high risk, chemotherapy plus L-asparaginase with anthracycline. Or in a very high risk, this is an important chart where a very high risk, you have to if there is a failure, patient fails to remit, then you have to go for allogenic bone marrow transplantation. And as far as the definition of remission is concerned, there should be less than 3% blast cells in the bone marrow, and or the residual cells should be up to less than 1%. And then you have a certain thing as the continuation therapy for 2 years or something in cases of high risk. The other supportive care, you have hydration, you have to look for the metabolic complications, especially tumor lysis syndrome, which is very common with which can be chemotherapy associated complication, where you have to look for the hyperuricemia and you have to increase hydration. You have to look for the hyperphosphatemia, where you can use phosphatic binders. And then hypocalcemia is more common, not hypercalcemia. Always remember where you can look for the calcium supplements. And then the hyperleukocytosis syndrome, where you can use leukopharesis, and for infection, broad spectrum antibiotics to be used, and the hematological support through blood transfusions. So this is the pre-induction phase. You have a induction phase 1 and reassess after 4 weeks of induction phase, and if there is a remission, taper prednisolone, and then 1 week of restart phase 2 induction. If there is no remission, give 2 more weekly dose of vincristine and doxorubicin, and then assess. And if still no remission, then you can go for the alternate regimen. So this is the maintenance phase, can be up to a duration of 2 years, and the first month and the second month is a little different. And follow up, if patient completes chemotherapy for 2 years without relapse, stop chemotherapy and follow up. If there is no relapse within 5 years, patient can be declared as cured. And allogenic stem cell transplantation is usually done in a second remission, and it can be done in the first remission in a very high risk case where you have WBC more than 25,000, Philadelphia chromosome positive, poor initial response to the remission induction. And the effects of treatment can be cranial irradiation effects like cognitive or cognitive or intellectual impairment, then CNS neoplasm, then chemotherapeutic drug induced can have endocrinal dysfunction, obesity, growth retardation. Especially important is cardiotoxicity, which is induced by the anthracycline group of drugs, where you can have dilated cardiomyopathy, or the heart will be cardiac failure, or the heart will have a lower ejection fraction or lower contractility capacity, and then can have a steroid and avascular necrosis of the bone. So this is all for the ALL, and in the next class we'll take up this the last remaining topic of the section of, not the last topic, we also have to cover Hodgkin and non-Hodgkin lymphoma. We'll try to do it the next 2 or 3 classes. Any questions you have, do let me know. Anything you want to know. So I'll just fire in few questions and see how much you have grabbed. Tell me which leukemia is more common in old age group. I'm talking about amongst all the leukemias in India, which is most common in old age group. Why hyperdiploidy is favorable? See, hyperdiploidy is favorable. The reason behind is nobody knows actually. It is an incidental finding or a collaborative finding that has a favorable prognosis. Maybe that might be having favorable prognosis with type of cells or types of cell proliferation. Yeah, right. Acute myeloid leukemia. Okay, tell me one endocrinal condition which is very common in young or a middle age group, and which comes with hyperkalemia, that is increase in potassium, serum potassium level, and hypotension. One endocrinal deficiency, and I give you a choice: is it Cushing's, or is it Addison's disease, or is it a growth hormone deficiency, or is it diabetes? Condition with hyperkalemia and hypotension in young. Endocrinal condition, I gave you the options: Cushing or Addison's or diabetes or growth hormone deficiency. Addison's, very good. That's, you guys are really rocking. Very good. Addison's, very impressive, no doubt. Okay, which endocrinal condition, again the same, you have the same list, that's growth hormone deficiency or Addison's disease or Cushing's or diabetes. In which condition we do insulin challenge test? In which condition we do insulin challenge test? Very good. You are up with the answer before I could shoot my questions. Okay, in which condition you have enhancement or preponderance of anti-islet cell antibodies amongst all those 4 options, where you have anti-islet cell antibodies? Is there diabetes or growth hormone deficiency or Cushing's or Addison's? Diabetes, that was a little easier one. Okay. Okay. which hematological condition comes with chipmunk feces? Which hematological condition is very typically associated with chipmunk feces, or other chipmunk feces? Thalassemia. I mean, really, you have grabbed very well and doing very good. We'll see in the internal assessment. I can really make out that you guys are reading very well. So thank you so much, class. I'm really impressed the way you guys are progressing. Okay, thank you. And anything you want to know, you can ask in the next lecture.